Okay, genius. So we talked about the first voyage of Columbus in the last lecture. Now we're going to talk about the rest of his voyages. There were three more. Altogether, he had four voyages, okay? And the central theme that we'll be focusing on throughout this narrative is that between Columbus and the Spanish settlers who come to the New World, there's a lot of tension, okay? And Columbus has a high standard for how he wants these colonists from Spain to behave, right? He wants them to treat the Indians, particularly the Taino people with whom he's made friends, with respect. And again, it's difficult for him to enforce that and to maintain good relations between the Taino people and the settlers. The crown, Isabella in particular, is always on Columbus's side here in wanting to show the Indians respect. In fact, she considers the Indians as her subjects with the same rights as those in Spain, meaning the Spanish colonists are not to interfere with their lands. They're certainly not to harass or abuse them in their person in any way. However, again, it's very difficult to enforce these rules on the colonists. So that's the central tension that emerges, okay? Now, the second voyage begins in 1493, all right? 1 year later, right? The first voyage was a huge success. Now everybody wants to go to visit Hispaniola and get some land and get rich, okay? So whereas in the first voyage you could only attract like people who didn't have anything to lose, now all the maybe the ambitious people want to go. The people who have a little money to invest in the voyage and want to get something out of it, now they want to go. So you start to get so first of all, the fleet is much larger. It's 17 ships going in 1493 with 1,200 men on them, okay? And all sorts of different people, soldiers, some farmers, and some priests as well. And you get, in particular, people from the higher class, hidalgos. These are landowners, okay? They may even have aristocratic titles, but maybe they're the younger sons of aristocrats, so they're not going to inherit the estate. They need to make their way. They want to maintain a certain style of life, and they have a certain military honor and prowess that they want to maintain, right? They're men that live according to a military code. They're like knights, okay? And as such, they want to maintain this honor. They don't want to engage in any kind of menial tasks, right? They also have a kind of a vested interest or a need in demonstrating that they are skilled in warfare, okay? And in order to show that you're skilled in warfare, you have to engage in it. And why do they want to show that? Well, it brings them recognition, and it brings them followers. So they want to do that, okay? Now, when hidalgos go to the New World, these soldiers, we call them conquistadors. So they're conquerors, okay? And again, they're landowners who are armed men. We don't want to necessarily think of them as soldiers employed in the king's army, though sometimes they go as well. But these are men who have a little money to invest and want to improve on that. So they are going with Columbus, okay? Now, what do they want to get out of it? Well, when they get to the New World, they're getting land, okay? The repartimiento, okay? This is something that was used during the Reconquista, when land was taken from Islamic peoples and they vacated it. Vacant land would be redistributed to those who had engaged in the warfare. So in the New World, in the islands of the Caribbean, land that is not being used by Indians will be distributed among conquistadors. The conquistadors are under strict rules not to interfere with the Indians' lands, but again, they don't always follow those rules, okay? All right. Now, when Columbus in the second voyage arrives back at Hispaniola, they find a couple of young Indian boys who've been, frankly, they've been castrated by the Carib tribe. And so the new arrivals here, their first encounter with native peoples, or what happened to these young Indian boys at the hands of the Caribs, that tribe that practices cannibalism, and they're horrified and they're scandalized. So they're scandalized there, and they're not thinking like, oh, these Indians are nice, like Columbus said. They're like, no, these guys are mean. Right, so the next thing they encounter is when they go to find La Navidad. the place where the men who had left from the first voyage were remaining, the little settlement there, they find that it's been destroyed by the Taino people. So again, the new settlers are thinking these Indians, even the Taino, are mean. Why does Columbus want to be friends with them? Well, Columbus finds his friend, Guacanagari, the chief of the Taino, and finds out what happened. Basically, the settlers at La Navidad had been told to leave the Taino people alone, especially the women. They had not obeyed these rules, and so the Taino had risen up against them and to defend themselves and had destroyed La Navidad. That's what had happened. So Columbus says, well, that's reasonable. That makes sense. I'll try to reestablish the friendship with Guacanagari, and that makes the settlers angry, right? So what you see is that the settlers are no longer trusting Columbus. He's not good at maintaining their loyalty. He's not good at persuading them that they should be friends with the Indians. And so relations between Columbus and his settlers are going down, as well as relations between the settlers and the Indians are going down, okay? Now, Columbus returns to Spain, and from 1493 on, there's hundreds of ships going back and forth between the Caribbean and Spain every year, okay? And Columbus is going to make 2 more voyages, so he goes back to Spain for a couple of years, and then he makes a 3rd voyage back to Hispaniola in 1498, okay? And what he finds is that the tension between himself and the settlers is even worse. And in fact, in his absence from Hispaniola, a rebellion against Columbus has arisen. Okay, it's led by a guy named Francisco Roldan. That's not that important, but the bottom line is that the Spanish conquistadors resent all the rules and laws that are being put on them by Columbus and Isabella to force them to treat the Indians with respect. Okay? And so they want to get rid of Columbus, all right? And so this guy that's leading the rebellion, Francisco Roldan, he demands that Columbus allow the men to take Indians as slaves. This was something that Isabella had forbidden. The Spanish were not to take the Indians as slaves. They were her subjects, okay? There were legal loopholes to this. So if a slave if a Indian who was not Christian attacked a Spaniard and the Spaniard, didn't kill him but spared him, legally that person could become a slave. So they were starting also to take slaves anyway, but they want more. So the leaders of the rebellion demand that Columbus allow each of the conquistadors to take 1 Indian slave, okay? And so what happens is they put Columbus in chains, and they put him on a ship back to Spain, and they send a bunch of guys back to Spain with him, and they give each of those guys a slave. So they all arrive in Spain, Columbus in chains. Isabella frees him. She sees that these Indians are being enslaved, and she's enraged, so she starts sending investigators to Hispaniola to figure out what's going on, okay? And then those investigators take control, but they don't improve the situation. They continue to mistreat the Indians, and it's like everybody that the crown sends there to improve the situation only makes it worse, okay? And Columbus is now back in Spain, exiled. I got a little something wrong. I just realized when I was talking. Columbus is sent back in chains after those guys with the slaves went to Spain. So the conquistadors with slaves go to Spain. Isabella gets mad, sends investigators to see what's going on, and the investigator turns bad, and then he sends Columbus back in chains, okay? There's one more voyage, the 4th voyage. In 1503 and 4 of Columbus, right? And this time Columbus, he ends up getting marooned on the island of Jamaica. Okay. And of course, while that's happening, the situation on Hispaniola, the governor is being mistreating the Indians. The situation is only getting worse there. It's not getting better. Okay. Meanwhile, Columbus is getting along pretty well with the Indians on Jamaica, with whom he's marooned. Now, the men with whom he's marooned with, the other Spaniards, again, they don't like, he's not good at maintaining leadership among the Spaniards, and so they start to rebel against him as well. But one of Columbus's good friends, a guy named Diego Mendez, goes out in a canoe and into the open Caribbean Sea trying to find Hispaniola. He finds it. He runs into the governor of Hispaniola, a guy named Ovando, who is an enemy of Columbus, right? He's one of these settlers who doesn't like Columbus. He puts Mendez in jail. Mendez finally gets out, goes back and rescues Columbus, okay? And again, Columbus, when he's marooned, he writes another letter from Jamaica promising that he'll use any money he gets from the voyages to, again, go find the great Khan, convert him to Christianity, and recruit him to go on a crusade to Jerusalem. So that motive is still present there for Columbus, even when he's marooned, okay? Now, this is Columbus's last journey to Hispaniola. He goes back to Spain in 1504, and he spends about 2 years trying to make sure that he has some money to pass on to his son. So the end of Columbus's life is kind of a sad story. Because of all the enemies he's gained from the conquistadors and also those in Spain who don't like what he's, how he's working with Isabella, perhaps to protect the Indians and limit the conquistadors. He has many enemies, okay? And when Isabella dies, she is his biggest ally. And so when she dies, Ferdinand doesn't really care what's going to happen to Columbus. And so all of his properties are being claimed by other people, okay? And he gets stuck in these legal battles trying to maintain some portion of his estate to give to his son. So Columbus not only has no money to go on crusade with, he has no money to even really, he has very little money that he's able to pass on to his son. He's trying to get some together. And so he dies in 1506, not having accomplished his goals, okay? And yet, at the same time, because of his goal of going west to find the east, to raise the money to go to Jerusalem, in that process, he's discovered this new continent of the Americas, all right? So we'll start on Monday with the consequences of Columbus's voyages and the relations, picking up on the relations between the settlers and the Indians, and how the crown is trying to protect the Indians along with the Catholic Church from the settlers. All right? All right. Be good.